Okay. Have you got some cues? We making them up?
Yeah. Breathing.
Hello and welcome to Creative Network, and tonight our special guest is Dave Webb. Hello Dave.
Hi, Deb. It's nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. I am just going to double check a few tech things. Oh, there we go. We're going to have an infinite loop. So I'm going to make that silent. There we go. So there's a slight delay on it going out. Yeah, there you go. Right, now we can forget all about
Okay.
forget all about the techie bit of it.
Out in the
room. Yeah, I've left the owl on a bit of a slant, but never mind. So Dave, obviously my colleague came to see your exhibition at Shepton Mallet Prison and told us all about you. But for those who don't know you, how would you describe yourself as an artist? What is your practice?
So how I describe myself depends on who I'm talking to, but with that introduction, I'll describe myself as an artist who works in digital media. And I've only recently dared call myself an artist, but I kind of feel like I've kind of peeled away a layer and found an artist underneath.
What was your hesitancy with using the A word then?
Because I suppose I came to it from technology, and the technology was like a bit of a Trojan horse that carried me into the art world. So I was always using, I've had a long career using technology for really boring things in businesses, in sort of corporate IT, and then had an awakening. I don't know, just I was a bit bored with those things I was doing, so I started dabbling when I discovered that you could make creative things with code. And it hadn't crossed my mind before because it wasn't really on my radar, and that was really compelling. But it also didn't cross my mind that anyone would take this seriously now, outside of my little sketches and experiments at the dining room table. And then I, through an event, a kind of community event in Bristol, I met a bunch of people who were doing this in serious ways, either as artists or as creative technologists, which is another label I sometimes use for me. But I'm really using my technology skills to help other people realize their creative vision. And through meeting those people, it kind of legitimized this thing. Oh, it isn't just a thing that I have to keep to myself. And so, slowly I kind of discovered more people doing interesting things, and that may be other people playing with technology or working with other artists like Ali, who's with us tonight, who then asking really provocative, not easy questions about what you could do with technology, which just unwraps another layer.
Okay, so what was what's been your kind of trajectory then in terms of kind of shifting out of the corporate sector? What was there any one? Well, you mentioned about the community, but when was the moment that you called yourself an artist?
That's probably quite a recent thing, but I think the biggest step was just choosing not to take another job in corporate IT and just thinking, I'm going to not do this anymore, because there's just it just looked like an unrewarding trajectory. And that enabled me to think, oh, I don't have, so it's like coming off that particular set of rails.
Yeah.
Made me realize that, the world stretched out in other directions. So that was really important. And then it allowed me to explore and get to a point where one day I could call myself an artist, but probably there wasn't a single moment other than trying it on, like daring to go out the house in a slightly bolder coloured hat or a boldly coloured shirt with a pattern on it, and thinking, I can get away with this. Nobody knows that I'm not the kind of person who wears bright shirts, and suddenly you're a person who wears bright shirts.
Yeah.
That was my kind of artist moment.
Yeah.
I tried it on and it didn't fall off, and I didn't feel ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay. So you're an artist. you're going to create a piece of work, what's your starting point?
So it's usually two things coming together. So I've got a craft, if you like, which is mainly making visual confections, visual effects, visual impressions with code. I write code. I'm going to talk a bit about the method and the approach I use in a minute, but I create screen-based experiences with code. And that is a craft. You just have to learn the hard way how to work with your material. I sometimes say code is a resistive material. Same as clay or plaster or stone, you have to learn what it does, what it doesn't do, what it allows you to do. It takes you places you didn't expect. Yeah, you set out to do one thing and the material says no, but then you accidentally go somewhere else. So there's that craft element of learning to master your medium, and with lots of surprises along the way. And then there's what is it about? What do you have to say to the world? And that could be anything. And sometimes it will be something from my own head, like a little brain worm that travels out and I'll doodle on paper and think, oh. More often, I might go and see somebody else's artwork. I may not even like the artwork, but it will provoke something in me thinking, I've got an idea. And I've got some ideas of elements of my craft, my technique that would respond to that really well. The other thing that happens is I've got to meet people who provoke me, who either come to me directly with saying, I want to build a thing that does this, and I can sort of come along as a kind of artist stroke technician, make it happen. Or more often we meet in the middle and I say, I don't think that's that interesting, but I think we could do this instead. So take the theme or some idea from that provocation and it takes me somewhere else. So really collaborations have been so important to me because of that, because I don't think all the answers come from me. They come from the gap between me and other people. So I'm not like a lone, I don't have any kind of lone genius illusions about it, because that doesn't really work out. There's things I will do in a dark room on my own. Oh, that sounds terrible. Erase the image from your mind. Sorry about that. But yeah, I don't. There's things I could do just me writing code that aren't that interesting for other people to be part of. But then I need to take those skills and mix them with someone else's ideas.
Yeah. That's really interesting. But I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, where you said that you do screen-based work. So that thing about a screen, but by a screen, presumably your work it could be on a screen, so a TV, or it could be on a monitor or something like that. But is it more in the online world, or does your work move between the two? So between the sort of physical space and seeing it like that on a flat screen, essentially, or projected into a screen that might be that big, does it?
Well, all of the above, really. I do, my starting point for a lot of things, particularly when I'm practicing my craft, is literally the screen of my laptop.
Yeah.
But I might then make that really small and put something in people's hands as a mobile interaction. Maybe it does both. So you interact with your own mobile phone with something I've created, but that's making something happen on a large scale projection, either in real time or not. I do projected things, which is what Laura saw at the prison. Had two projections and some physical work and a soundscape all working together. So I suppose saying it's screen-based is limiting, but I am basically controlling pixels a lot of the time is where a lot of my work happens. But I then also think about the whole human machine interaction.
So like the user interface.
Yeah, and I'm only really interested in technology that celebrates the human, right? There's a whole bunch of us being part of the technology movement who don't really like what it's doing to us at macro level and as individuals.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to find technology experiences that celebrate the essence of being human, but using technology to do it rather than technology eroding that.
It's almost like a fine ethical line, isn't it? Because we know, we talked about social media earlier, where, there's a reason why it pings up with a red tick or a red whatever, because that excites our brain and makes us go to look at, and they know the tricks in our brain.
It's literally not an accident. It's a very carefully
It's all
crafted
deliberate.
experience. It's a
Yeah.
beginner box, training us, rewarding us for doing things that are helpful for the people creating technology.
Pavlovian dog.
It is, and it sounds like a conspiracy thing, but it's just 100% true. It's like evident. But that's not all of those technologies that do those things could be used in many different ways.
I know, and just not necessarily to defend social social media, but with since the advent of marketing, that those things have been happening. It's just kind of almost more obvious now in this format. So.
Yeah, so I like to watch a movie. Even though I paid for the movie, I still have to endure marketing, which really upsets me because I paid. I thought the deal is I get stuff for free if I endure marketing messages. Something like ITV and Channel 4, and that old school broadcast media, and now in the more modern media. So I feel a bit squizzed when I'm clearly not paying enough to not have to be marketed at. But I think we buy into that exchange of value that we may not like it, but consciously or unconsciously, we kind of, if we had to pay for all the things that are free, digital tools, would we buy them? What would be the fair price? We'd live in a very different world where we didn't have these free tools. And that's for me as a developer as well. A lot of the software I use is I'm standing on the shoulders of software written by other people, which is incredibly empowering than if I had to subscribe to them all individually. But it also leaves me really vulnerable. I mean, the director of digital collections at the V&A, whose name I can't recall now, talks a lot about the problems of archiving digital works, because even things I've made 6 months ago, the technologies that stand on may not still be available without me rewriting my code. So let alone
and that thing again of the user interface, we made our colleague Richard Tomlinson made a game for the libraries. It's just it's public service, and you would think that that would be standardized across all the libraries. No, but I mean, wowzer! Like they were on dial-up. Some of them, not even just that kind of that sort of hardware infrastructure. They were on Windows 1 or and then trying to create something that can be accessible to all.
That's really
is
important.
A nightmare.
As and I worked on a project exploring dancing. What do you get from dancing? What are the barriers to dancing? And we were looking at ways to mediate this. This was in lockdown. How can we create an experience where people can have that feeling that dancing gives you, even the fear where you're not ready to go on the dance floor yet? How can we capture that and give people an accessible experience? And we explored VR because there's some interesting experiences of VR. Most of them we didn't find that pleasing and didn't fit our needs, but also the fact that VR headsets, even the cheapest of them, is pretty inaccessible. So we looked to make something that worked with most laptops, so that we could create this virtual dance experience, and we wanted that to be available to all, not just in the sense of what equipment do you have, but also how does your body work? Do you have maybe social anxiety or disability means you wouldn't go to the sorts of places where dancing happens. And so you ask yourself all those questions, you realize technology can not replace those, but give some alternative experiences. And most technology just explores this narrow band of assuming that everyone has a really modern smartphone with a good internet connection, we saw that wasn't true in lockdown, like,
Yeah.
families
Yeah.
of 6 people all fighting over the kitchen table for the broadband and the 2 laptops in the house.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in Somerset, I mean, there are just patches, aren't there, where there's just no, mine has,
Yeah.
got really bad kind of broadband, and they really are still on dial-up in some places because they just haven't got anything. So yeah, how do you? So that's something that you are thinking about all through your process in terms of accessibility and engagement.
I'll be honest, it's not there all the time in every project I do, but there, I think you just sort of learn to ask yourself questions and don't reach for the easy. Don't think of yourself as the audience, I suppose, is the. Yeah.
Did you want to throw something in there?
I think also a huge amount of what you play is an important word in your work, actually, but the way your work comes out is looking at the abstraction of emotion and feeling. So you talked about the human interface and the humanness, but actually you're also really good at embodying that in an abstract way that is very accessible.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought.
And in terms of that A word that you were talking about at the beginning, I would definitely define you as an artist, but I can see that it's taken time for you to define yourself as an artist. But the way you use code as an abstract language, you use it to make abstract creations, but they're abstractions of emotional responses and ideas, which are abstract anyway, but they are very human. They are what make us who we are. Does that make any sense?
It does.
I think the dance thing was exactly about that. It was about being a presence and an interaction, but without having to look like a perfect android, or whatever, any of that.
Yeah.
I think the work in the prison. So this is a group shows me with 5 other artists in Shepton Mallet prison, all very different, like media and approaches. But it was fascinating because when you're doing your stint of invigilating the show, you have time in a space where you talk to other artists, and you wouldn't have time, you're dashing about.
Yeah.
And they realised that actually what I do isn't that different from what a painter does, or mixed media artists like Tina Salvage. And Luminara, who curated the show, who, she works with many different media and there are many different ways of representing things. So, okay, yeah, this is okay. I can live in this world. I'm not an imposter. I suppose imposter syndrome is a thing that people feel in all those words, but it's not about feeling inadequate. It's just like, oh yeah, I've got something to say.
It's another language.
Yeah. I
think. And the fact that actually your language ultimately comes down to ones and zeros is a bit scary to people who, I don't code, but I love the fascination of actually it comes down to a pattern of ones and zeros ultimately. I know that you use code at a slightly higher level, but underneath the code that you use is ultimately ones and zeros.
And it's physics, it's transistors turning on and off, which get hot, and there's actually matter moving around. It's like mind blowing when you think about it.
Yeah.
But I thought.
Sorry, I'm just.
So I was one of the things I was thinking of some examples I could use, and there's like a year and a half ago, I went to.
Just angle that screen, Laura, and then with the camera will pick it up. Yeah, back. Oh no. Not that long ago.
So a year and a half ago, no, maybe slightly longer ago, I went to London to see a show by Ryoji Ikeda, who's a musician, but who works with visual technicians to make the most digital work you can imagine. It's super crisp, it actually reveals the digital nature of the work. It's very much about sensory overload. and the subject matter is digital as well. And so it's kind of, the geek in me can go to celebrate that digital nature of it. But there was no question in my mind, or the people who'd gone with me, that it's very much art, because it makes you feel something, it makes you question things. Even just having that sensory abuse is almost unlocks new ways, new pathways in your brain. So that was quite overwhelming and very rewarding for me, because I'm just thinking, how would I make that? And then immediately just like walked along the river from Strand to not too far, to Tate Britain, where there's a permanent Turner exhibition there. And we're looking at this, and it was lovely, gave our brains and our eyes a rest. It's very, calm. But actually what struck me was that Turner is a technologist, because Turner was finding new ways of using substrates to contain colour, the way colour was used with those substrates to play with light and the physicality of paint on canvas. And I'm saying that as a non-painter, but it was just imagining, thinking, this person was just saying, well, we've been doing this stuff with these things for a really long time, but I can just explore and push the boundaries of what technology can do. And so although they're very different, I kind of went to a technology show and thought, yes, this is art. And then I went to an art show and thought, actually, this is technology.
Because it's a tool, ultimately, isn't it?
It is a tool. It's and not that different. We're working with Alison, who's a mixed media artist and embraces many different materials and forms and ways of getting ideas across. And then working with Alison, we just use technology together as an extension of that. It's no more or less novel or important, and often it's mixed with physical elements as well, and creating, hopefully, new experiences for people that neither of us would perhaps have arrived at on our own.
Definitely not.
Can we see it? Can we see an example of your work?
Yeah.
Do you want to move on?
I'm just going to scroll through because I can't remember exactly what I've got. So this, I put this near the start because this is a motif I've ended up with, and I've got a lot of the work I create. I use what computers are good at, which is repeating the same thing many, many times very accurately. And then because that accuracy is actually quite dull, I then work out how I can vary that repetition. And then rather than me deciding how to repeat those things and how to vary them, I introduce something that machines aren't necessarily good at on their own, which is chance and noise, or an external input. So the external input could be me dancing in front of a camera, as in the dance project, but we use randomness and a kind of special kind of randomness. It's not truly random, called noise, Perlin noise. It was actually invented by a filmmaker.
And is it called Perliness because it's like a grain of sand?
It's called Perlin because the animator who came up with it, the name was Perlin.
Okay.
And it was just a way of getting the machine to create natural looking forms, like mountain ranges or waves on the sea, or variations in color on my skin across my hand, that I could deliberately work out, but actually often the eye is just, we find it more pleasing with think of like a marble worktop. There's not a pattern that you can recognize, but your eye is restful and it's looking at it, or grain in wood, because your brain can relax, saying there isn't like a pattern here that I have to lock onto and get in and absorb meaning from. I can just relax. There isn't any order for me to overwork myself, and then it becomes relaxing. So this is a kind of motif effect that turns up a lot, and this was in an animated form was in the show at Shepton Mallet Prison. So this was one part of the projected loop. Just using this, and it really worked for the Shepton Mallet piece where I was imagining being in the cell.
Dave, if I could just get you to move slightly to your left, yeah, that'd be great,
So I've set in place a set of rules that are rigid, and then some variations and like wiggle room within the rules. And then I'm just allowing noise to make some of the choices about where within those wiggle boundaries. And then I'm just doing that lots and lots of times. So a new arc will be drawn at a random place on the circle. And it has some invisible forces applying to it. It's like, you know, currents or waves, but it's just maths that push them. And over time, you can see that the kind of the intensity is shifting from like being quite jagged to being quite smooth, and that's just like another form of variation. It's just a set of rules, some variation, and that variation is controlled by some noise. But I might do it with a hand gesture in front of a webcam,
yeah.
so that I could feel a bit Harry Potter, you know, just saying, thinking, yeah, I could give a view of this in a, you know, room scale projection, sense of agency area. But this is kind of like an example of how I use the machine to do what it's good at, which is that repetition and mathematical control, but then make it look not at all machine generated by putting another influence in there, or natural influence.
You just mentioned that it's just maths, but actually the real world is just maths too. I was thinking I very much enjoyed being in Lanzarote recently, and the winds on the island, where they come around the mountains and why they come around the mountains and the sea and the patterns they make. It's all, we can predict it all, we understand it all now, but because we understand the maths and the modelling. And it's actually just fascinating to think how much more we understand now because we can do the math. Because
maths isn't a like man-made concept. I mean, I'm sure people can talk about this much more authoritatively than me, but it's almost like we've unlocked a language that already existed. We just got names for it. We give. So like phyllotaxis, the pattern of sunflower seeds in a sunflower head, is a ratio between how far from the center you are and the angle of the spiral. So it changes constantly the further out you go, which means that it's sort of tightly packed even as it grows out, and each circle obviously has more seeds in it than the preceding one. It's just a ratio. It's a very specific ratio. So you know,
it's programmed into the plant.
Yeah, and if I do a simulation of it, there's a very narrow band that will give that sunflower head look. But then sunflower seeds, sunflower heads are all imperfect, right? So you'll get disruptions to those patterns, and that disruption is quite fun to play with as well. So this is what we call a flow field, where I think I've got some code running this as well. So there are just some particles that are influenced by invisible forces like currents, and the particles just allow themselves to be blown by these currents, but they leave a trail behind. And so there's both the real-time movement of particles, which is interesting itself, but then having the trail build up. It looks like something natural, but
it's like my ceiling.
Yeah. My ceiling.
Does it always come from the edge?
It does, because in the code I've started them at the edge, but I could start them anywhere.
I think one of the first platforms that I saw for algorithmic art was one that does that way. You could select the colors, but also you could just select the point that it starts from, and then it would just create.
And every time you do it, it will be different. But because the randomness isn't real, I could make it so that it always generates the same seemingly random pattern. But it's nice because the techniques to make this happen are kind of a few simple techniques layered on top of each other. And I could make different choices and end up with wildly different outcomes. So that's the joy of it, is that you come up with relatively simple systems of behavior and let's call it natural forces, have their way with it. In much the same way that you can have a field of wheat and a wind blows across it. And each of those stalks of wheat is independent of its neighbours. It's not moving similar to its neighbour because it sees it and it's got FOMO. It's doing it because it's sort of feeling a slightly different force of the wind.
Yeah.
And maybe that's different because its neighbour absorbed some of the force before it. And you know, 10 stalks over, that force has morphed a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe there's another wind coming in. And so it's kind of simulating those.
That's how people win sailing races. 2 boats over, it's going faster.
This is an experiment based on a colder mobile, right? It's a simulation, and now there are 3D systems like a Unity game engine where I could literally rebuild the model. But I've built my own model in maths of a colder mobile, and there is no wind, but I've created some sort of algorithmic wind that's blowing these, and each of these is behaving independently. This stuff at the bottom looks a little bit incongruous, but this was because I wanted to use this as a MIDI controller. So I wanted to say, well, at any one moment from this point of view, how much red, yellow, and blue is visible to me, and then use those as inputs to control music, which I never got to do that with.
Okay.
But it's an idea that because it's digital,
Yes.
I can use it.
To
Like the
inform
job
something
isn't
else. Yeah.
the job isn't done when I've got something attractive and appealing on the screen. We can do other things with it and connect it to something else digital. Or, you know, the other way around. What if I had a breath sensor, so in its restful state just at the start? What if I could go and make it blow, and then it would come to rest again and it could blow. So it's not that different from the other examples. It's just it's more recognizable as something in the real world than some of the other examples.
I was just thinking about the blowing of the breath and something we talked about earlier, which is that suspension of disbelief, and actually that you can get people will quite willingly engage with it, you know, even if the breath doesn't impact it, they will still engage with it. If you we did for carnival, did your parents ever do that thing where you pretend to throw something up in the air and you flick the back of the paper bag? So we did that out there in carnival because we've always been trying to engage with the audiences who come to carnival, but get them in the building, that sort of thing. But they're really not interested. They're interested in getting their space on the street and looking into the middle of the road. So we thought one year, we'll do something that's in the middle of the road then. And this was before this was kind of built, and we had a projector projecting onto the road. And my colleague Rich just filmed a short sequence, which would then was of something dropping in water. So we had the ripple, and we literally stood out there as characters and did that thing of, you know, just throwing something up in the air, and then we would do a very simple visual gesture for Rich to click a button to get it to go to the splash thing.
Brilliant.
And we thought we'd be out there for 15 minutes. We were out there for 45 minutes, and they were queuing up for it because they were, and I don't think they necessarily wanted to work out how it worked.
But it was
willing to do the,
because of your real world performance that's connected with it somehow by some magic to digital thing. And I think
Because it's magic.
magic.
and that sense of
Yeah.
agency, you know, so I you know, the idea of using people's body, or like things that come naturally to people. So not using a mouse or a touch screen as ways to influence things happening on a screen is nice. So there's a Japanese collective called Team Lab, and they're not just an arts collective, they're researchers, scientists, engineers, very well funded. And they tour the world making room scale installations that are magical. So you're perfectly projection mapped so that there's almost no shadows, regardless of where you stand. Lots of computing power. I don't know how many rooms of compute they've got running this stuff. So I saw it at the Royal Academy 2018, I'm thinking. And you would stand in this room and there would be like this sort of natural magical world of flowers growing, rivers flowing. And what you realize is when you stood still, the river parted and flowed around you, because there's also sensing in the room.
Yeah.
If you stood still for more than a few seconds, flowers would start to grow in your body. And you didn't notice because you're not looking at your own body. You only notice because it's happening to other people. And then when they move, they just kind of like fall away. And it's so clever because it's weaving that magical make-believe and storytelling, and then digitally realizing in a way that's so lovely, the realization of it, that it doesn't feel digital. It doesn't, you know, and that to me is the epitome of it. But it takes that partnership. Like I say, I don't do things on my own. I might be able to bring a part of the engineering, but I think a lot of interesting art now. I mean, most fine artists can't do work without a technician, because you can't master metalwork or large scale fabrication of all these things. Although Ali's pretty good at most things. I'm just thinking of
Well, artists like Oliver Eliasson, there's a studio and there's an architect in there, and like you say, there's a well of metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Oliver Eliasson's really interesting because I actually think that I'm happy to call him an artist, but I think a lot of the time he's actually a designer of experiences.
Yeah.
And that sounds like a put down, but he's very explicitly designing a thinking man's theme park of experiences and there are some of them have artistic intent, and some of them are because the experience itself is just enough of a justification and there doesn't have to be a message. And I think it definitely has a designer approach to the creation of his pieces, like a lot of iteration, but also a lot of deliberate design. And maybe because of that cross-disciplinary, you have to have a workflow that is not chaotic.
Yeah, but I wonder whether that's part of that. That's almost what you are too, as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because I think we are thinking about how people are going to engage with the work, and especially, you know, if it's on the screen or if it's online, you are still designing the experience. Really.
I am, and I switch. You know, sometimes I definitely have to switch gears and be an engineer and a problem solver. I'm thinking, is the average device going to be able to carry the performance of what I mean? Because on my quite new MacBook, yes, of course it can, but a person with an 8-year-old laptop that they've been handed down by a family member, is it still going to work on that? So I have to be an engineer sometimes and work at that level. But just thinking of I wanted to bring this example up, which is very different. So this is using Arduinos to control LED strips, so sort of LED animation in there. I haven't got a good moving image to show you. And then it's also controlling the solenoids, which connect to compressed air supplies and sensors. It's using little kind of like LiDAR sensors. So as people walk up to these flowers, and they're the smallest is about 7 feet tall, the tallest is about 9 feet tall. These flowers open up and there's a hissing because the compressed air is flowing. And these are made by Ruby Sant, another person I currently collaborate with. And she loves making sculptures from junk materials and also steel fabrication. And then I bring in some of the, the electronics, which is a new skill for me, and an electrician who can make sure these things are waterproof and will work in Blackpool for 2 weeks in the winter, as they did. I was quite surprised they survived. And then that pattern we then applying to other installations. But the flowers were great because it was the first time these disciplines came together. And none of us could have built these things on our own. And it's not just like being commissioned and saying, oh, come in and build this specific part. It's a very fluid co-design process, working with someone and pushing each other.
It's having different people, because it's cross-discipline, cross-media, it's having different people who have the skills, but the ones not from that skill area are the ones pushing the challenge of the media, I think, as well. It's like, you know, what can it do? Can we push it this far? And it's that play, so you don't know what you will succeed or not succeed with. And I think for me as a sculptor, there's always that thing of I have an idea and the idea will drive, but then the material affects the process and fights back. And it's not just about winning over it and saying, no, but I want it to do this. It's allowing that conversation between you as an artist and the material to create something beyond your initial idea.
I think that's what is very different from the engineering mindset, which is this convergence. I mean, of course, you have to make compromises, and we can't have all of these things. You have to, you know, make it lighter or faster or stronger. And so it's not that engineers are kind of fixed and linear, but the problem-solving mindset, which is really useful, is about eliminating obstacles and converging, and allowing yourself to flex and diverge, and letting the material tell you this isn't going to work, but these still have to be delivered to Blackpool in 3 weeks' time. So what can we build
this
instead?
isn't going to work, but oh look, this is really pretty.
Yeah.
And it says something else and it sparks off that. And actually that which I didn't know it was going to do is saying what I really hadn't even realized is what I wanted it to say. I think it's that play of not being fixed on exactly what the outcome is, because process is such an important part of making, that's different. Whereas I think in the engineering world, we need this, it must do so and so, and that's your driver, limited by cost and time. Whereas in the art world, we're very limited by cost quite frequently. Somehow we quite often stretch time. I think we have TARDISes in our own heads. But the ideas can wander.
Yeah, definitely.
And that little bit, I think when I was mentioning earlier about the play within your work, I think a lot of your work enjoys that element of awe. And I wasn't being facetious saying, oh, but look, that's pretty. I think we put down that so often, whereas actually in the same way that when you go and take a walk and look at nature, we're all talking about all walks and all of these kinds of things now, which aren't sci-fi characters, they're going out in the green world. I find it extraordinary that we're having to actually talk about going for an awe walk instead of just enjoying that awe as a natural thing. And I think that's where creative people allow themselves to do that more easily. And it's coming
definitely.
back now. People
Yeah.
are actually recognizing, gosh, it's really important. And I'm going, yes, well done.
Yeah, well, that thing of, we were talking the other day about social prescribing, and that,
Yes.
that idea that, you know, you would get prescribed a walk, or you get prescribed some creative
It's
activity.
extraordinary,
But
but
it-
he prescribed it. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah, and there's part of you that sits there and go, isn't that such a shame that we have to be prescribed it?
Yeah.
Where did it go? Where did it go wrong? You know, and there's definitely something in there, you know, along the way where we stop playing. Exactly what
Exactly.
you were talking about earlier.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it is nice to create spaces and experiences where people can play, and gives them permission, because a lot of artwork can be either it's at arm's length, it's like behind the little do not touch barrier, and it's always lovely. It's not like fringe arts where there's lots of artworks that people have made saying please touch, and like the work that you did in Somerset Arts Week, which was very much it's not finished, it's constantly evolving, come and be part of it, come in it. I mean, how often are you invited to climb in a piece of artwork? And but I think people will walk past things and maybe worried that it's got the art label, it might be alienating, or it's not for people like me. I think there's a huge problem around that, and it's just because perhaps there's some of the wrong kind of art is getting shown, or not in the right places, because maybe they're in these sort of churches of art and they don't have to be. What's nice about the Somerset Arts Week.
Ideas about the churches of art can be, well, it's a really interesting you've used that term, because actually I think churches for a lot of people are a place, oh, that's not for me. But then quite often when you go in them, they have an awe about them that you just go, wow, this is really wonderful.
So Wells contemporary, you get both in one go, right? You get the awe of like a place that was built to honour something maybe you don't personally feel, but you're thinking,
but it was built to make you feel awe. Yeah,
it makes you feel, and then inside that we put some modern awe experiences, which I kind of like.
And jumping back to Oliver Larson, I remember when, the big sum that he did in the Tate. To me, that was the moment that contemporary art in the Tate changed, because the behaviour of people in the Tate totally changed with that piece of work. I mean, I'm not a historian, but to me it was an absolute moment of change in the way contemporary art was appreciated. The late night opening and people lying around in Turbine Hall like it was a beach, just going, oh, that's so cool. And allowing that time, that experience, and it was that sense of wonder and awe, and just sitting next to people you didn't know, just whoa, this is great, isn't it? And to me, that was an extraordinary moment in how people enjoyed art, and I think the word got around, it spread, people started coming to the Tate in a way that they had not done ever before. I think the Tate's process on it. But I also think it changed those open lates, those come and experience, enjoy the provocation and stimulation and all of those things that can be abstract or can be very particular, can be human, can be all of those things.
The late night, I think, is a really important aspect of it, because when do you go to see a band or go to see a film? You go in the evening, unless you're taking your kids or something. Your first choice is probably go in the evening, because the working day is done, or at least I've created a boundary, I've set it aside for the day. I don't have the time to take a day off for a gallery. Well, I try to when I can, but gallery day in London. But if I go after work, to say the Holborn in Bath do like a monthly late event, and not only do they open, but they run something that is often curated by students. So
pleasure, isn't it? As well, there's that relaxation and pleasure, I think, is really important work.
It's having your audience as part of that process, because when are your audience available? When are young people available?
Because otherwise it's just retired people going to art galleries, or you're not reaching. So when your ACE funding bid says you've got to do outreach and reach people who wouldn't normally experience the art, well, if you're going to put it in the same place at the same time as all other art, then you're not going to tick that box, because people aren't going to come. And also, if you allow people to have a couple of beers while they're in there, why do people have beers when they go to I went to a concert last night, had a beer beforehand, because it kind of goes with the experience. I'm saying you have to have a drink, but there's a reason why we like to have a drink. And doing that is send signals to the brain about the kind of thing. It makes you more receptive than you might be otherwise. And there are other ways to achieve this. It doesn't have to be through drink, but you change the context of going to a gallery because the whole tone of it, maybe there's a DJ playing, and the whole vibe of the place is different now. So the art is the same,
Yeah.
but the audience experience is completely transformed.
It's prompted a thought about your students and how did they come to it? So what's their routine?
It's really interesting because I teach, I'm desperate to teach computational skills to our students, and we're trying to make that happen at Bath Spa where I teach. So I'm teaching people who come to do a technical degree, creative computing, and although it's got creative in the title, a lot of the students come thinking, oh, I'm going to be a games maker, or I'm going to work in web design, or maybe they don't know that specifically, but they also haven't embraced some of the creative process and practice that you might learn if you, say, went to Art Foundation. And I may be talking out of turn, but the feeling I get is if you brought students into an art degree without having done their foundation, it's almost like they haven't done their potty training yet.
Yeah.
They have to learn some basic ways of being that you really would get in the way of you teaching them what they need to learn at art school. And so in first years on the degree are ready to learn the technical skills, but they haven't had that year of freedom to kind of wash themselves with a school mentality, learn some just process and practice, and realize that creativity doesn't come from lightning bolts, but comes from turning up every day and doing hard work. And so we're trying to bring that in through like little bits. I do a module called digital storytelling, where we try and do some rapid idea generation, learning to be vulnerable and share ideas that aren't going to be the best, but you have to share them anyway. Making something with those ideas and sharing what you've made, whether that's like a story in a single image, or a short film, or an interactive story using a storytelling method called Twine. Very simple media, and they only have a couple of weeks to work on things, but trying to kind of give them some of that. Yes, you need technical skills to do what you're going to do, but the world needs you to be able to use those in the creative context, or to work with other creative people and speak some of the same language. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I mean, I was literally thinking of, it doesn't surprise me that a lot of them have come through the gaming side of things, and there's probably a number of things that's kind of influencing that, isn't there? Not least, the sort of how much gaming we all do as individuals, and I mean, it certainly hit a massive high during COVID, didn't it? But also that the thing of your average person who's an art teacher, our experience of computers is we are literally a consumer. We buy a bit of software that enables us to. So in our experience of computers, there's been something missing. I mean, I know we talk about digital natives, but they're not. They're still consumers, really, aren't they?
They very much are. So they may create. I mean, what is good is that they learn language of storytelling through, Instagram, TikTok. They've absorbed some good language for laying out a story like this. These beats connect with people, particularly their own audience anyway, when it's like when their audience is people like themselves. And so they have tools for rapid content creation without like filming A and B roll, downloading it into an editing suite, doing post-production. No, it's just like film, edit, overlay, shoot, send. And and of course they're limited in what you can produce with those in that workflow. But my God, it's productive, and so they've got that attitude. But then there's a limit to where you can go unless you engage with a different set of tools that are going to slow you down and do need a bit of planning, you know, sketching on paper, storyboarding before you shoot anything. That don't come easily to people who've been like raised to be impatient.
Well, and that thing of collaboration as well, because that's sort of the TikTok thing. That's very. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's true of all of the TikTokers that they're just doing it on their own. They have teams of people helping them to generate this content, don't they?
That's the illusion, isn't it?
Lie.
Like the illusion, anyone can do it.
Yeah.
People with a team.
Yeah. So, I've lost my train of thought in terms of that thing about consumption and when we get the tools to make. So if you were, I wanted to ask you this question. If you were to recommend a starting point, you know, in terms of exploring this kind of work, what would be your recommendation?
For coding in particular, there is a great YouTube channel called The Coding Train, and it uses most of my work, even quite sophisticated stuff that I will put out in the world is written in P5, which is a JavaScript library, which means it works on the web. A couple of things about that is JavaScript is a really useful language to learn anyway. The things you're making can be shared anywhere in the world because it's on the web. So that the things that I'm showing here, you know, that where I click on a link, I'm just as an illustration, let me just open one. Maybe one we haven't looked at. This one, this is one from a workshop. And I'm just going to edit another to make it a little bit more fun. And run it. So here's the code. There are 42 lines of code in there, which isn't very much writing. And then I've made this sort of interactive mandala sort of thing that just responds to mouse motions. And I can edit another number here and make it even more kind of wacky. And that's really fun to do with people in a workshop, so over an hour and a half or a couple of hours. 42 lines of code isn't very much. And they may not understand everything that's in there, but they'll learn a lot of cause and effect.
Yeah.
You know, changing this number is having an effect, and we can work backwards from there. We don't start with an empty screen. And so this language here it's real JavaScript running on a real web page, but it's using P5, which is kind of like a really, really good place to learn both JavaScript, but also this sort of visual language, the things that you can get computers to do on a screen or making sounds, getting inputs from users. So it's the same thing I use to detect gestures for Alice and my dance program. It's all using this. And the Coding Train is a really nice YouTube channel for sort of introductory step-by-step from beginners through to, you know, people have been doing it for years. That's a nice way to get into it. But you don't have to learn code. There are platforms that let you, you know, there's bits of software. But I encourage people to learn a bit of code because it's not just learning a particular coding language. You're learning what a computer can do, what we call computational thinking. It's like, I want to create a wavy pattern. What about a computer can I get to approximate this? What can the computer do that I can harness in a bit like when you get, you know, working with plaster of Paris, which a lot of children might do at primary school. But plaster of Paris is changing the whole time. The moment you add the water, it gets warm because it's curing, it's a chemical change happening. And there's a point where you can feel it changing and you're in trouble then. You've got about 3 minutes before it goes really hard and then it's something entirely different. And learning that materiality is kind of learning the same thing with a computer. So learning what it can do, how many objects can I have on screen before it slows down? Well, there's one way to find out. And most people do in my workshops, they type in 2 million there and suddenly the thing fails. But we've learned something important there, that computing power isn't infinite. A bit like learning that, you know, your clay goes hard if you leave it out overnight and you can't model it anymore. So it's kind of learning to code is really the only way you learn those skills. And it means that when you use software, like even if you use Adobe software, like After Effects to create an animation like this, you will understand what's possible. You'll have some insights, and coding gives you that. So the coding train, just Google the coding train, it'll come up.
Okay. I was thinking about that, funnily enough, Adobe, but actually Adobe Animate, when you were talking earlier about, you know, your dance project and the fact that, well, just I don't know if we, do you just want to explain a bit about it, because I'm not sure whether we talked about it before we kind of went live, as it were. So do you want to explain about your dance project?
Yeah. Do you want to try and explain it, Alison? Or should I? No, I'll start off and then you go. So we had this idea we've been talking about, and a lot of ideas burn slowly to start with. This is another thing for young people to get to kick ideas around sometimes in the background. We've been talking about missing dancing in lockdown, and even if you're someone of my age, where could I go dancing where I don't feel ridiculous? That isn't a wedding playing Take That and, you know, stuff. You know, if I want to seriously dance, festivals are good, you know, because nobody cares what age you are in a festival tent. And when you're there, what does it feel like, and what exactly is it that you miss? When let's say you are at a wedding, which can feel awkward if you don't know everyone there, at some point you're probably going to find yourself dancing to Take That, or Robbie Williams, or, you know, something from 15 years ago, and you won't care, but it took you a leap to cross that line. Some people, they have no boundary. Alison, I'm not looking at you. But some people need a really, it's, you know, it takes a lot of social anxiety, and yet if they can find themselves on the other side of that line, it's so liberating. Yeah. And it unlocks something in them where they're not really self-conscious anymore. They're just letting themselves loose. And in a something like a rave or a festival tent, it's very easy to find that, because it's mostly strangers. Yeah, everybody looks a white mess anyway. So the kind of barrier is lower. The bass is unbelievably loud, which is kind of another kind of carrier signal just drawing you in at a primal level you're not even consciously aware of. And you'll find yourself at that synchronicity where your heart rate and your breathing and the heart rates of other people in the room are converging, and there's some magic. And this is all without the aid of chemicals. So very grand ambition. How much of that can we determine with minimal bits of research, just among ourselves and our friends? How much of that could we bottle and mediate in some way, in a digital way? Do you want to pick up on that, Annie, at all? Anything that I said?
I think what was interesting was we spent, obviously lockdown was a strange time, and we spent quite a long time thinking about what we wanted was to bottle that essence, not just to get people to dance. And so we were very interested in the triggers to step up and do that. So in fact, one of the ways we began was just making absolutely ridiculous videos of ourselves dancing in our own houses. And we were working with a music student at Bath Spa and playing with different types of music, and we put things out on Instagram, asking people about what their triggers were as well. And at the same time, we were looking at products that are currently available in VR, because VR is an easy way to go into an imaginary world. And they're hideous. Sorry. So hideous. I mean, actually, that said, one of the magic moments, because we were both quite new to VR, and I'm going to name brands. In the Oculus Quest introduction program, there's this wonderful little robot that you dance with, and the comparison between the experience and the charm of dancing with this non-person, really simple, against going into you're at a nightclub package where you're transported straight into being in a circle of people who are looking at you dancing and telling you how you should be dancing. Actually, one of the most, all the things that are not what I like about dancing. You know, all the judgment, and they're virtual people and they're judging you, and you're there going, oh my goodness, this is so the opposite, the extreme opposite of what we were looking for.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably quite important to go back to that social anxiety thing, because the thing that started me on my pathway with it was because I'd been having a conversation with someone I worked with about, oh, it was Deadmau5, I think, was playing in Bristol. I was like, oh, that'd be great, love to go to that. Oh, someone who likes it. You know, we were really different generationally. She was so excited that I wanted to go and see Deadmau5. And I said, well, yeah, go together if you want. And she didn't cry off because I was an old person. She said, oh no, I can only dance in my kitchen. And I just was so, you know, this was before lockdown, but it was the thing that triggered me to think, gosh, that's terrible. That's absolutely terrible that you're so self-conscious that you can't just go and let go and have that connection, because I'm a 90s generation. That whole rave scene was just absolutely incredible in terms of connection, in terms of the pheromones or whatever it is that gets going, that makes you feel so fantastic. So what we were looking for was an abstraction of that feeling, to get away from physical bodies and judgment and social anxiety, because society's told us we're not okay in our bodies or whatever, whether it's our own mind or society's judgments, it doesn't matter. That fear is there, that self-consciousness is there, and it restrains people from letting go and actually enjoying.
And they don't get to experience that release.
Yes.
And that thinking. The payoff for crossing the line is that you feel okay. You actually think none of that judgment. Like, I thought I wasn't wearing the right stuff to go in a nightclub, but once you're dancing, nobody's looking at you.
Cares.
It's only your projection that people are looking at you that you're worried about, and you're just, you know, doing your best dad dance moves, and you don't care. And these are some images. So that we did these little Instagram films, which are a lot of fun. And we've just commissioned a student to make us some dance music, which is extraordinary. So this one of us, and this is me and my wife dancing. We set up a projector in the front room to get nightclub kind of effect.
So but this was really interesting, because we were questioning what works. So darkness, anonymity. Not actually even, so for me, one of the things that came out is my hair is really important, because actually now I can't see anyone and they can't see me, and that mattered to me. That's part of what allows me to just go. I don't care. Darkness did matter to you,
Darkness
and the lighting.
Definitely.
I mean, we just played with those different things.
This was us in VR, in a shared VR. Actually, that's you and Harvey. So there's 22-year-old that joined us. So Alison and I are not 22. But honestly, the experiences we had of filming in a photography studio, we went to a motion capture studio, part of our sort of research, how to do this stuff. Probably, you know, we weren't sure what the outcome, the end product was going to be, but it was great to have the opportunity to try. So Alison and I, who sort of bonded over some of the shoegazer guitar music and rave music of the 90s, Harvey, who loves a lot of the same rave music, and you know, second time around, and none of us were self-conscious dancing in front of each other in really weird situations. I mean, wearing this ridiculous motion capture suits, with researchers standing around, you know, it wasn't the most conducive environment. Would you like to see what we came up with?
Definitely.
So if I can, I'm just going to.
No, I'm really intrigued.
And it's really simple. Right? So I have to allow the webcam. Refresh that. It doesn't seem to be completely ready yet. It's the curse of the live demo, it may not work.
And interestingly, I'm just seeing the little logo that
So
Harvey created.
I haven't got the enter button showing, so I'm just worried.
That one's in it.
No, they should both going.
But one of the things, so the little ribbon thing Harvey created as a logo emblem of what we were, but it was because we were looking at that abstraction. So it's almost like, ribbon dance in gymnastics. So actually that's hugely
symbolic of that sort of freedom and that
exactly.
movement. Yeah.
And actually we had all these kind of discussions. I hope I'm not offensive to anyone, but we were really interested in how, what I call the Mr. Manchester dance, which is, but there's so much tension through the body to get that exact, it's this tiny little hand move, but it's completely throughout the whole body. The core work that's going on to achieve that hand movement is incredible, versus someone who's flailing around with their arms all over the place. Just interested in, it's the same amount of drive in terms of energy that's pushing those very different moves, but how they come into the digital world. So rather than these judgmental avatars, actually, Mr. Manchester would have the most electric kind of static thing, because it's a tiny movement, but it's super intense, versus someone who's moving much more. In fact, I did a lot of long exposure photographs when first starting this, and I did an experiment where took three long exposure photographs of someone dancing. We were wearing head torches on various extremities. Obviously with someone set up with the camera, someone dancing, no one else around, but you're still conscious of being filmed. Then dancing with other people, but they weren't dancing with them, they were dancing, and the encroachment of space was what I was really interested in. And then leaving on long exposure, and everybody had to leave the room and just leave the person dancing on their own. And the light tracks that you got from this different psychological experiences was extraordinarily different, absolutely extraordinarily different. So yeah, I think that's what we were looking for. How can we represent the energy without the body?
Exactly. And when you're in a room or a tent full of people dancing, you're not seeing them as individuals, which is perhaps why you're not self-conscious anymore. The curse of the live demo is not going to load on this, and we need to edit it, otherwise you can't do it. Essentially, it creates a private room. So one of you generates a code, tells the other person, you could like WhatsApp them the code if they're at the other side of the world. You both enter the code, and when you're both ready, you each say, "I'm ready." And if you're both ready, you kind of enter this space. You can't see yourself, even though the webcam is using your gesture to
Well, you
track
can't see
your
your
body.
physical body,
No,
but you can see your energy.
wrists and your head are tracked by little vapor trails. And so you can see yourself, and then you can see the equivalent trails of the other person. And so you can dance together. You can't hear the same music, so you could be dancing to different music.
Was one of the other big influences on our decisions was the concept of silent disco, that you're in the same space and you're dancing to different things, but you're both experiencing, or however many people in your silent disco are experiencing pleasure without necessarily having to be tuned into the same thing.
It sort of removes that. So the fact that you can't even see your own body means that you're not worried about it. You're just you can, until you start moving, it's really not very interesting to look at. And then you can see the other person as well. And if at some point you're not happy, you can unready yourself and then the room shuts down. So you have both ends have control. So it sort of brings in that, you know, like the Zoom fatigue thing. So you're thinking, I'm okay, I'm on a meeting, and suddenly it's just a bit much for me. You can check out and, and then go back into it again.
Yeah.
So
So do you leave your partner stranded?
well, they know that you've left the room. So you
Okay.
both, the room closes down when you're doing that. You both, the room exists, but neither of you are in it. So and then you can just say, when you're both ready again, you go
So,
in it.
and how engaged were you by that energy that was your own energy? Or how much are you looking at your partners?
They intertwine.
And they have
Feelings at once,
they're
and
not-
they can react with each other, can't they? So
They're just different colours. So if I go back to this image, it's not not that image, sorry.
I asked because we did, I mean, in a very tiny sort of way, we took a webcam with a kaleidoscope effect to a day with children with disabilities. And they interacted with the kaleidoscope, and you know, we're doing the ribbon dance, literally doing the ribbon
Yeah,
dance.
it's like ribbon dance. So
like that.
these are the trails. So the blue is your own, and the orange is your partner's the other side. But this is me at an event doing now. Obviously, we're side by side rather than separated with only the internet. But as far as the computer's concerned, it does the same thing. And this is me, and Sylvia here is actually a dancer, but she didn't make me feel inadequate in the dance. You can see how so that's actually my mood showing in orange on her screen. So I'm the one kind of going for it there.
So wow, imagine if you combined that with 360 projection.
Yes.
And then
Where have you imagined?
Yeah.
Just keep funding.
so the
Where
dancers
we
in the room
love
are
to-
creating
Yes,
you know,
Absolutely.
the nightclub
And,
in a
well,
way.
Our dream scenario is actually the live performance. That, so you know, you have people like DJ Shadow who do, you know, the most incredible light and film displays. But actually, what if you're on a tracker? So if the audience have got trackers,
Yeah.
and actually the audience response, you know, when you get to, obviously not the DJ Shadow, but when you get to the point of jump, then
Yeah.
it's like, what's going to happen to the visual display?
Yeah.
If the audience is tracking is what's driving the display.
I think people, sort of Max Cooper is really taking projected visuals beyond them just being a backdrop to electronic performance, but like still using projection, but making 3D effects, and you know, there's the Printworks in London, which gives a much bigger canvas for these kinds of things. And so it's really interesting to see where people are going, where performers themselves are saying, like some kind of audience agency. You know, I still want to orchestrate.
I could imagine Coldplay, for example, because they in their concerts they had these things where everyone's bouncing up and down and creating the energy that was sort of then measured on the screen. But they, again, that thing of they seem to have something that engages with their audience. And I think I went to see The Killers recently at the Bristol, you know, and their graphics, they were amazing because the band is like that big, you know, but it was kind of like, you know, it was amazing. Okay, now what's the next thing? So the next thing was
absorption and watching the graphics. And you almost start to, but actually I could be at home.
Exactly.
Listening to this, because I'm watching the telly and I'm listening, which has almost stopped me.
And the music,
energy of dancing. And it's that interplay of how do you drive the energy. I think the Coldplay one's a better analogy of, you know, the more energy there is, the more response the visuals give. And it's the same when playing as well, isn't it? You know, if you've got a great audience, the feedback vibe between the audience and the band changes, and you know, it goes goes in other places, doesn't it?
Venues might have to change to accommodate you, does.
The thing that we took to Glastonbury is, this was the container we had at Glastonbury, but in Bristol there's a venue called Lost Horizon that was created by the people who created the Shangri-La area of Glastonbury when they didn't have it for 2 years. So they created a real nightclub in Bristol, but they started exploring the idea of having a digital twin. So, you know, the whole venue created in VR or other mediated form, and then lots of different ways. I mean, really lots of experiments about how can you create experience so the remote people can have a presence there that can be felt by the in-person visitors, and the other way around, but without feeling that the mediation itself, like the VR headset, the novelty, you need to transcend that so it feels like more than that. They haven't got there yet, and they're constantly experimenting, but we took their digital twin, so an exact 3D replica of their venue in Bristol, and because we didn't have a very good internet connection, it being middle of the field in Somerset, it was all offline. But what we did, we could put 3 people at a time, and they were all in the same virtual nightclub, and they could interact with each other. So they're in the same physical space, but also the same virtual space. So there's this interesting interplay between, they can hear each other in the real world, and they can also like teleport around space. So they're in a row here, and we're trying to keep them from moving too far because it's tethered VR headsets. But they can teleport around in the space and like go up in each other's spaces. So if you have 3 friends in a row here, it got very lively. We were doing this till 1 AM when we decided to shut it because it was getting, the audience were not in a fit state to go in VR, and we hadn't done a risk assessment on that particular. But it was really interesting. I'm not saying that it's the answer. VR going in a virtual nightclub is not, for the reasons Ali and I have discussed, and not an end, but as experimenting with what you can do. And we definitely got some joyful childlike moments just from people experiencing things that you could do that maybe you can't do in the real world that were fun. And I think we're just at that experimental stage with things like this. The rules aren't written, even though Meta have put their brand name all over it, and you call it the metaverse. It doesn't mean they own the blueprint for what it will become. I think it's highly unlikely they will get.
No,
and
looking at some of the kind of the initial graphics that they've kind of come out with, I mean, like, well, why do I want to go shopping around a virtual supermarket? It's that, and it needs artists to push what this space can do, really. I just want to come back to your thing about funding. So where do you go for your funding?
Well, our first bit of funding was Studio Recovery Fund, and we made a second bid to WECA, but we didn't get it.
We didn't get it. So
and we haven't actually had the time and energy to do it.
Studio Recovery.
So the studio is it's kind of an innovation centre in Bath. It's hosted by Bath Spa University, but I was part of that before I had my job at Bath Spa. So I'm a resident of the studio, which is very mixed discipline. You just apply to be a resident, you get a working space, as long as you are doing something in the field of commerce, creativity, technology, somewhere where the Venn diagram, those overlapping.
And to big up Bath Spa, I was at Emerge as an Emerge resident, which is a non-virtual studio support space for graduates as well.
Which is lovely and it's going really well. And I was part of that 12. So it's all, these things all connected up. But the studio decided when they couldn't provide the space, they said, well, let's provide some funds instead. So they had 5 small funding pots for projects to do something that was innovative, but also satisfied certain criteria. I think this one, inclusion, was one of the criteria that we ticked the box for. Also, I think I learned afterwards that we were the only group that applied as a collective. So you, me, and Harvey applying rather than individual.
Mm.
But there are funds around it. I think if you're playing in this space of creative technology, so Bristol and Bath Creative R&D are a fund that's coming to an end, but they have had lots of opportunities. So they had a particular funding round called Expanded Performance, which is saying, how can we use technology with people who run venues, with theatre makers, with people who are in charge of audience experiences? How can we build new experiences?
Did apply for that one as well.
So there are funds out there, but they all have their own criteria. Maybe you match their profile, maybe you don't.
Yeah, and the space is another one that kind of comes to mind in terms of digital and theatre and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, and there, I think there are things. There's another fund at the moment called My World, which is much more commercially driven. So the screen-based industries realizing that maybe a flat screen it's not going to, the print book is still around, right?
Yeah.
The 2D screen isn't going anywhere, but maybe we need to explore new production methods and maybe 2.5 dimensions, 3-dimensional production methods for entertainment.
Yeah.
So it's not R&D, it's commercial aims plus R&D. That's what they're funding. So it might be like a studio working with an artist or a studio working with a researcher.
But just thinking about kind of distribution and reaching audiences and, getting your work seen, obviously some of this is going to where audiences already are in some respects. What about how do you distribute your online art? How do you direct audiences to it?
That's a great question. My work is like a laboratory all the time, and it kind of justifies its existence because I'm trying something out. The dance project was very purpose driven. We had something in particular where we were trying to do.
If you don't mind me interrupting,
go
I
ahead.
think with the dance project, actually, one of the areas that I think we are really interested in is, and would love someone to fund more development of it, is most of the VR development is being developed by gamers.
Yeah.
And it's still the game world. And actually, there's a vast number of people who, what VR can do is so far beyond the game world.
Yeah.
But it's finding those entry points and what is exciting and what is playful and pleasurable and fun, whatever age you are, and what those entry points are. And I think that was the other thing that we were really experimenting with, although we went for low tech because we wanted to see how simple we could bring it because of the lockdown world. Had we had continued funding, I think we would have definitely looked at the high-tech end as well. But it's
I would love to just push out the
it's
low
that
tech
you're
version.
not, but it's also just not having to chase something, not having to beat someone, not having to, do you know what I mean? There's so many other things, and not being obsessed with the real world. It's like, I don't want to, actually going back to the Wii, and doing exercises on the Wii. That sounds ridiculous, sorry. The joy of the virtual world is you don't have to be in a gym to do that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, give me some other world. If I'm unable to, actually I'm dyspraxic and I just bust my ankle and I was very much unable to go walking in the real world. But give me a beautiful place to sit on my bicycle and do my exercise and be somewhere that isn't sweaty and smelly and horrible, thank you. It's like, but doesn't have to involve the things that are frustrating me with why things aren't working properly with my physical body right now, when you can be in an imaginary world. And I just think there's so many places we could be going with that tech that actually we're not even touching the edges of yet.
I think there's definitely as this unfolds, we need, like I said before, we don't really have a visual set of metaphors for what a virtual world might be like. In the way we have a desktop metaphor for our computers, sometimes we call this the desktop, which has grown over like 25, 30 years. We don't have that, the virtual space. And I think technologists working with artists are going to discover some of this. I think theatre makers are going to like push some of it.
And sociologists and
And
scientists.
psychologists,
And
yeah.
and
So I was part of a
CEOs and yeah.
human computer interaction lab this morning looking at alternative touch interfaces, but people are carrying out this research, and I think I was invited because I sit in this, and they already know more about the technology than I do, but they know that I make playful things with technology, so they invited me in. But I don't have a problem making things for audiences where the audiences are, you know, but giving new experiences. So this weekend I've got a collaboration with this one here. It's very, very low tech looking. It's very deliberately kind of retro technology. It's a projection in a cupboard in a cafe in Bristol where it's a big enough cupboard to sit in, and you make music and make visuals by putting numbers in this grid, and people just play with it. It's kind of like a very simplistic interface. It's not using modern screens. It's the retro vibe will suit the hipsters of Bristol, I think, quite well. And but it's just play. We won't know how it goes down until some people play with it.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've learned to do is I know what I think I've built and how I think it should be used. You need to watch people interacting with your work. This is a conversation we've been having on the drive down here. You learn so much because, again, it takes away any illusion that you're a genius. It just withers as soon as you watch people. What you thought it was is not what people see. So you get this more democratized view back of what it is, what's interesting about it, and it probably isn't what you thought. And then you can either tune it, maybe if you feel a sense of ownership of what the art is, maybe you stick to your guns and think, that's interesting, but this isn't a democratic piece of work. It doesn't matter to me what you made of it. I still need it to go out in the world like it is. Or you can say, I am actually interested in making an audience friendly experience. So I'm going to learn from this. I will iterate it.
It's the same thing as the medium and the process. It's part of that process because the interaction with your audience is the same as the interaction with a lump of clay. If the lump of clay wants to go back to its form from what you've stretched it to, it isn't going to stretch. If the audience don't see what you want them to see, got to find, if the most important thing is you want them to see it, you've got to find another way to get them to see it.
Yeah.
But if they're seeing something else
that
is also exciting, you've maybe made a different piece of work to what you thought you'd made, and maybe that's justified to be what it is. And maybe you still want to make the other piece of work, but maybe there's somewhere else that can occupy both. But that's art.
That is art. Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, because that is art. So this is something you're going to do next, did you say? So what is?
So this is, we've just installed it. Well, partly installed it today. So there's a cafe in Bristol called Dare Shack, quite in the centre, and they have a kind of mission to bring art into the cafe, and they fund projects. They've only funded one before this. We're the second piece of art. They've just got a small fund, and they're really exciting. They've got a lot of energy because they've only just opened the cafe a few months ago. And yeah, it's experimental. We don't know whether anyone at all will go into our cupboard and play. But it's got some windows so people can see. We're hoping that curiosity will draw people in and they will have a play with it. And And in a way, like I talk about, like, you know, use the whole body to interact because we're all fed up of doing everything through the screen. It's kind of the opposite of that and going back to using a keyboard, but hopefully it's in a playful way that is not overwhelming.
So how long will it be there till?
It's only on this coming weekend,
Just
although it may well be on a little bit of next weekend.
Well, maybe, because we've got plenty of comments. But you know, maybe we can, you know, talk about and entice you down with it. So bring it to Bridgewater.
And we could test get the dance thing working and do some.
That would be
testing of the dance
great.
as well.
Yeah, definitely. Fabulous. Okay. And of course, and then so thank you so much for being our guest at Creative Network. And we're looking forward to, because the next conversation is going to
And Julia.
amazing. Yeah, and Julia. Yeah. So that is on the last Wednesday of January in the new year of 2023. So thank you for joining us. We will see you then.